Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I am back with another indie comic review. This week we are looking at actually two works from Brenden Swan, one today and one on Friday. This is DisintegrationStreet, which is Brenden Swan's first effort, and it's quite interesting to look at. There's a lot of good stuff here, and there's some solid critiques to be made. I'm also going to be looking at the comic Strangelove, which is related to DisintegrationStreet, but not the same thing. And there's actually a pretty strong connection between these two stories, but I actually only got Strangelove because this printing is, well, he offered it to backers of this printing for reasons that I'll get into in a minute. All in all, Swan is a very talented artist and writer. He's got great ideas. He has a good sense of art. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of his foibles and his successes in a minute. But let's start, as usual, with the physical product. This is not the size of a full-sized floppy or graphic novel. And it's not even a taco band size like you might get in manga that you pick up at Barnes & Noble or something like that. It's a little bit smaller than that. I believe this is 5.5 by 8.5. That looks about right. So about the size of a half a sheet of standard paper. And it works, but physically, it's just small enough that the type is not always easy to read. I don't know if it was a typesetting thing or what. There were a couple of speech balloons, too, where the typeset seemed smaller than others, and I don't know if that was done just to make the best use of real estate on the page or what. I would have liked a slightly larger book size, I think, just to make it fit on the shelf better, fit in with my other indie comics better. In and of itself, it's not a big deal. And everything else pretty much about the physical book is quite pleasing. The paper feels good in the hand. It's got a nice finish to it. The binding is quite good. The cover stock is a nice sturdy paper that has some kind of a matte finish on it, it feels like. Very good stuff. It feels very professional. And my one complaint, which Brenden is aware of, is that some of the text winds up in the gutter. This is partly because Brenden went with a different printer for this print run than he did with the last one, and I assume the print files did not get entirely properly reformatted, and some of the type wound up in the gutter, where that was not the case with this previous version. What Brenden decided to do was he gave us a digital version of Strangelove for free, and he just sent us these. Now, under some circumstances, I would say it would be better when you get the proof and you see that kind of a misprint to try and correct it. I don't know if Brenden didn't catch this in the proofing process, or if he just didn't get a proof from this printer, or if he was just worried about stretching out the timetable of his campaign, and he decided to just fulfill with what he had. Now, as a person who believes strongly in product quality and customer service, I'm not a huge fan of sending out a product that has user issues like this. And some of the pages are kind of hard to read. That is an issue. Hopefully it will only be an issue with this print run and not with any other versions of DisintegrationStreet that he puts out. Hopefully it will not be an issue with any other books that he puts out. I am holding off on calling this a problem to watch out for, because he clearly noticed it, and he had to make a decision where he balanced a whole bunch of different concerns. The constraints of the pandemic have made printing very difficult. There's no guarantee he'd be able to get replacement stuff. There's no guarantee he'd be able to afford the price of adjusting his schedule. A lot of times that comes with penalties from printers. So it is an issue. It is an issue that I believe deserves discussing, but Swan did take steps to make it up to his backers. He did tell us about it, and I give him credit for that as well. Whether this is a sign that you personally do not want to do business with someone who takes this approach rather than, making sure he gets the best product possible out, that's your call to make. Personally, I'm pretty satisfied with the decision Brenden made. I am well aware that while principles can be very simple in statement, give good customer service and the best quality book you can, in practice, customer service and best quality can be at odds. There can be a whole bunch of other factors that you have to look at when deciding how best to do that. And the specifics of a situation are important to deciding whether a person has lived up to a standard or not. All in all, I think Brenden did better than he could have. I don't think he hit it 100%. I would have liked to have a version of Disintegration Street that did not have gutter issues. I am glad that I got Strangelove for free. I'm going to talk more about that story on Friday again. I'm very glad that I did read it for a number of reasons, but I think just looking at this book, I would have obviously preferred a version without gutter issues, and hopefully he did not order a very large print run, because I would not recommend buying a volume that's out of this print run. It is kind of a downer on the reading experience. That said, all in all, physically a pretty good book, especially for a freshman effort. Artistically, Swan's style is quite interesting. It's loose and a little cartoony. You can kind of see this image here on the back. It has pretty much all of the principal actors in the book, and you can see they range from quite normal to Platt, I believe her name is. She's the innkeeper, and she's pretty cartoony. There are more cartoony people. There are less cartoony people. All in all, I don't mind seeing those, different aesthetics blended a little bit in here. I think Swan does a pretty good job of handling it. To pick a random page from here, this is a bit of what the interior art looks like. It's really no different from what you get on the cover. I appreciate that. I don't really care for it when the carpet doesn't match the drapes, so to speak. And there are... I understand the desire for a really good high-impact cover, but sometimes it does border on false advertising, and that annoys me just a little bit. Swan definitely does not have that problem. So if you see the cover art here, or anything on the interior that you like, you are going to like the whole book. Swan's style is interesting. It is clearly manga-inspired, but it is not a manga style in and of itself. There's a lot in the posing of his characters in particular, and some of their compositions and outfits that reminds me of early Hirohiko Araki. Obviously, he does not have the incredible technique that came to embody Araki's art, especially in his later years, and even now. He is an incredible technical artist, is Araki, and Swan isn't there. Who is? Very few people, like maybe 100 people on Earth have that kind of incredible technical skill. Swan definitely has a lot of room to grow. Again, more on that on Friday when we look at a book that he's done more recently. But there's a lot of promise in this art. It's very expressive. It's very stylized. His poses speak a lot. Again, this is one of the things that remind me of JoJo. His characters pose in a way that expresses a lot about their personality and what they're thinking. I'm looking for a really good example here. Here's just a character introduction pose, and that's really good because it gets the instant appeal and also the almost inhuman aloofness of the character we're seeing here. And yeah, so the posing and the outfits remind me a little bit of Araki. They're very distinctive. They're very strong. They really grab your attention, and I like that. Here's an interesting posing one. We can tell in this panel, this person has just inserted themselves into a situation, and everything has just kind of gone off the rails. I really like that. And also, another thing I should mention, which you saw in that panel, is the coloring. The coloring in here is brilliant. The tones are very strong and they're very rich, and yet they're organic. They always feel right. I don't really have another way to put that. Here's another great panel to illustrate that. Here we see Julianne, and she is a very girly girl, and she just pops out of that pink background and that nice blue dress, and you get the sense that she's kind of carefree, which is very much her character as I read it, and excitable there. And all in all, the coloring really helps you read and process the story by telling you what is and is not important. Lastly, we have some really really haunting and almost creepy imagery. Well, definitely creepy, not almost creepy. There is a bit of the Silent Hills or the Ring ghost story tradition alive in Disintegration Street, and that brings us moments like this, where we see these kind of horrible supernatural creatures, and they are very, very well done. By the way, Disintegration Street is roughly PG-13. There is some violence in here, not a lot, but there is violence and scary moments. So I wouldn't recommend it for a very young audience, as you can probably tell just by looking at that panel I just showed you. So Swan does have some very, very wonky moments, especially early on in the story, where the art is not, I don't know if composed correctly is the best way to put it. Here's an example. So we have this old man just sort of approaching the characters on a path, and Lillian greets him, and he's already past her, and it looks almost like she's speaking to empty air after a person has already passed by her. We really should have had a speech bubble in the first panel where we see the old man, and then we should have just had him walking by and her looking, with a discomforted expression. And that would have, I think, conveyed the intent better. So there is some bad composition like that, which does not really succeed in telling the story I think it's intended to tell. You can usually put together what you're supposed to take away. And that happens less as the story goes on. I can't really think of anything that happens like that in the last chapter. There are weird paneling breaks and other similar things to that as well in this book that it's not that I couldn't understand what was happening, but every time I came across one, every 10, 15 pages or so, it took me out of the story. And that's not good for the purposes of telling a story. Obviously, you want to have a very smooth reading experience, which Disintegration Street does not always have. And Brenden is a young artist. Clearly, he's still developing his craft. So hopefully he can learn to smooth that out as time goes forward. I still think that Brenden shows a ton of promise in here as an artist. I'm looking forward to seeing Disintegration Street Volume 2. I've seen a couple pictures of that, I think, on his Twitter that are looking very good. All in all, good stuff. Oh, one other thing I should mention is sometimes his facial work is a little unconvincing or awkward. And I don't know if that's part of his storytelling. He just likes that awkwardness to kind of keep you on your toes and feeling uncomfortable, or if it's unintentional. So I don't know. It's definitely something I would be looking at ironing out more. But if Brendan's going for it, Disintegration Street is kind of a creepy tale where awkward facial expressions can work to create discomfort in the reader. I would just emphasize more in that case making a more realistic awkwardness, for lack of a better term. I don't have an expression here. A really good one marked out to. Here's one. So we have this character here who's crying. He's kind of a side character, and I'm not sure what to make out of that facial expression. It's almost uncanny. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to find it uncanny or if I'm supposed to empathize with the character. Again, I can understand what's going on, but I'm confused enough that I'm taken out of the story, which is not a good outcome. For the story itself, Disintegration Street strikes me as a weird blend of Scooby-Doo and Silent Hill, I think, is one way I've seen it described. I would actually characterize it as a blend between the paranormal investigation sequences in Mob Psycho 100 and The Ring, because it has some really weird horror moments to it. Not necessarily gory, although there is a little gore. There is some violence in the story again, but it has a lot of bizarre imagery, which is very well executed, and it has a sense of the horror of the psychology. We're looking very much into people's minds, and we're seeing unpleasant parts of the human psyche there, and it's interesting. I don't know how well this will land for you, though, because there is a lot of that kind of slapstick humor where somebody, and again, very manga inspired, somebody will say something off kilter or stupid, and then somebody else will make a retort and smack them down, literally, often. And it's pretty slapstick. And humor in horror is actually, I think, a very important element. It gives a pacing break, it gives a breather, and it's kind of subverts expectations both ways. You can have something that looks like it's about to be horrible and is subverted into a laugh for a bigger laugh. You can have what looks like it's going to be a laugh moment subverted into horror, which is extra shocking. Both of those work very well. Neither of those moments happen in Disintegration Street. And I kind of feel like the humor never derails a scary moment. That's good. This is not the latest incarnation of Marvel humor where the jokes just undermine all the other emotional stakes. And the jokes are, they run the gamut from pretty funny to, okay, I saw what you're going for there, but not fully funny. All in all, I think the jokes land more than they don't. But none of them are particularly strong. They're certainly not as strong as the horror moments. And I think that does firmly keep Disintegration Street in the mystery, suspense, horror genre as opposed to a comedy like Scooby-Doo is. But I think the amount of slapstick in particular in them undercuts the stakes just a little bit. There is a moment in here where a person is just floored by a robot. More on that in a moment. And I thought they were dead. I thought they were going to die from that. And they don't. They're just fine a minute later. And it feels very slapstick, which is odd because the robot is intended to be a very real threat to the characters. And I found this kind of slapstick suspense juxtaposition to undercut the stakes of the suspense just a little bit. Now, we didn't know that the girl was going to be fine until later, but going back and looking at it, knowing that she's just going to be fine on a second read, kind of undercut the tension in the moment. And by kind of, I mean basically completely. The robot does look very dangerous, and it attacks with things other than brute physical strength. But I don't know, something about that kind of undercut the stakes in that whole sequence. I would recommend trying to avoid using your legitimate threats in a kind of a slapstick way. Most of the slapstick is between the main cast, Charlotte, Julianne, and Gen, which is fine. Again, this is a bit of the Scooby-Doo thing. Scooby-Doo could be legitimately creepy at times and still have this really jokey central cast. So I think just having so much be slapstick, where people do things like throw their laptop out the window, and then it runs in the next scene. In fact, the character comments, "I'm going to need a new laptop." Well, they don't, because the laptop keeps working. These kind of muddy the tone, and I think that toning it down or going with verbal witticisms would be a better way to handle those moments rather than this kind of slapstick. Even though, again, it's clearly inspired by manga, and it's very common in manga, I would try and avoid having quite that much slapstick, except with the character of Gen, who is physically superhumanly resilient. We know that. He's actually a ghost. Not a traditional ghost, but some kind of weird energy construct ghost. More on that in a minute. He is just more physically resilient. We know he can be beaten up more than a normal human being, as he's got the Wolverine rule. As long as you don't destroy his head, he's fine. So yeah, you can go a little bit more overboard with that in his case. But the who was it? It was Jezebel was the one who got smacked by the robot. As far as I know, she's a regular human, and the fact that she got up from that right away kind of bothers me. And I suppose there's a possibility she's also a ghost, but I don't know. There's not a lot of hints to that. Anyways, for the story itself, Disintegration Street revolves around the disappearance of children in the town of Disintegration Street. And we are basically asked to accept the existence of Disintegration Street in the world as a fact. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to raise any of the questions that are obviously come from having this town where everyone knows the ghosts can exist and they interact with the living. Okay, it's there. The world is fine with that. They seem to be aware of that, although they seem to think of it as more of a urban legend than a fact. And this is helped by the fact that the ghosts appear to be normal humans. As you can see, Gen is right here in the middle. He's not surrounded by a weird aura or anything. I think those clouds are really just for effect. They don't follow him around or something. And all in all, he just appears normal, as do the other ghosts we see. So it's taken as an urban legend, or maybe people just aren't interested in dealing with ghosts because Disintegration Street has been in the world forever, and they're not impressed by them anymore. I really don't know, and the ins and outs of that are outside the scope of Disintegration Street. It just doesn't seem bothered with them. So I can accept that. I can accept that as part of the premise. We are introduced in the first page to our main character, Charlotte, in Chapter 1, which is called New Life. This actually leads me to suspect that Charlotte is a ghost. She just materializes in a field, almost, it seems like. And she's found passed out by Julianne. She doesn't seem to know quite how she got there. She's not an amnesiac. She seems to remember her life before coming to Disintegration Street just fine. But I don't know. We never really get a whole lot of build-up for why she came to Disintegration Street or what she was hoping to accomplish. She actually seems to be at loose ends at the beginning of the story. It's all very strange. And this does bother me a little bit because no one ever seems to ask her about it or try and get her backstory out of her, and we never get it volunteered to us either. Again, I suspect Charlotte is a ghost. I suspect she's been called here by the town itself, much as Silent Hill the town in Silent Hill will call people to it. Very interesting concept. I would have liked to see the characters pay a little bit more attention to this big question mark that's just wandered into their town. Julianne just sort of finds her on the side of the road and invites her to stay in her hotel room with her. Odd. Very odd. Also, people in Disintegration Street don't need to eat. They just need to drink and sleep. Again, odd. And there seem to be world-building elements at play here that we're going to get more of. I don't mind waiting on the world building. I do mind not having a clear picture of who Charlotte is entirely by the end of this. She's a curious girl. She has some kind of psychometric or psychic abilities. She can read events in the past by touching objects, it seems, or by occupying the same room as people. She can pick up their memories. It's not clear how those powers work, but I don't think I needed a full explanation of them. And she's helping investigate this case of disappearing children. A lot of shenanigans happen in that we eventually get an interesting partial answer to that. I don't want to get into spoilers, but it is a wild ride to get there. It's pretty interesting. There are a lot of things set up here that are clearly for later, and I don't think any of the hanging plot threads left me unsatisfied. I was very satisfied with the answers we had at the end, except I still really don't know anything about Charlotte, who she is, where she came from. And while that's true also of Gen and Julianne, they're not really the main characters. Charlotte is clearly the main character. And I wanted to know more about her by the end of this story. I did learn a few things about her. She's kind of spunky, but she lacks... I don't know if spunky is the right word. Sharp-tongued, I think, is what I want to say. She's willing to make digs at people, even people she hasn't known very long. But she doesn't seem to be very self-motivated. She's not exactly a passive character, but she doesn't have any agenda of her own. She picks up other people's problems and she makes them her own. And then she helps out with them. But she suffers a lot of moments of ennui through the course of the story, it seems. All in all, she's a bit of a riddle. And I would like to know more about what shaped this character, how she got to be who she is. But what we got is definitely interesting. And the world building is the stronger part of the story. We learned that there are these ghosts in Disintegration Street. They are energy constructs that seem to be created when somebody dies, and they get all of the memories and experiences of the person who died. But the energy construct itself is quite durable, quite self-repairing. They get abilities beyond a lot of mortals. Interesting stuff, which is not explored in too great a depth. So I think that's a plus. It prevents the story from bogging down in itself. All in all, the story is kind of compelling in a weird way. Again, I think it's those horror elements. Charlotte gets wrapped up in the minds of a bunch of strange people in the town, and it's very interesting to watch her noodle through all that and work it out. You can kind of guess where things are going by about the two-thirds mark, which is about where you want to be able to guess where things are going. This is not a subvert your expectations, plot twist kind of a story. It's more of a Ghostbusters. You find out a bunch of stuff with the protagonist, then you realize what the last final hurdle is going to be, and you get through that hurdle. All in all, good storytelling, competently executed. Dialogue is a little wonky at times. If you don't like that stupid thing retort style of humor that I mentioned before, you may not like the humorous elements in this. That's frankly one of my favorite parts of humor in manga, so I also enjoyed it here. My one big critique of the storytelling structure in Disintegration Street is the robot subplot, which comes out of nowhere. They just introduce this companion robot that then tries to is used basically as a cat's paw to try and murder people who are getting too close to the truth, which is a good trope, except the introduction of robots to a world that already has ghosts about halfway through the story just comes out of left field. It's very disorienting. I wasn't sure how important this was, and man, it just threw me for a loop. I had no idea what to make out of it. And I would have tried to find a way to cut that and perhaps have the antagonist trying off the protagonist in a different way. That's just me, though. It just felt like a plot element that was introduced from nowhere and did nothing and vanished again. Now, we learn more about this robot, its origins, its owner, and its ultimate fate more in Strangelove, and I'll be talking about that on Friday. So I do kind of like that connective tissue. I just feel like the Disintegration Street end of the connection is really forced. It did not work that well for me. Also, in the introduction of Disintegration Street and our characters, some of the dialogue is a little clunky, and it's quite fast and feels a little forced. Not a huge fan of it, but, opening exposition dialogue can be hard to get through, especially when you have the page constraints of a comic book. So I would have liked to see that smoothed out a little bit. I would like to see, again, a little more of Charlotte's backstory. I would like to see the robot element removed and perhaps moved back a couple of steps for later. Especially because there is a second connection to Strangelove that is more minor, but equally clear. And I think you could have kept these two stories connected, but still taken the robot character out. It does serve to establish that the characters in Strangelove live in or near Disintegration Street, so that's interesting. And all in all, I want to read the second volume of this. I want to know what's happened to the disappearing kids. I want to know what is the nature of all the strangeness in the world. I want to know more about Charlotte. She's an interesting character that we never get a lot of answers for. It would be interesting to know a little bit more about Gen as well. I don't know how invested I am in the rest of the cast, but what I really want to see is more executions of this really great psychic dive kind of events where Charlotte goes into memories, and we see some of this really great bizarre imagery where strange things happen. And that's, really technically a spoiler, so maybe I shouldn't have shown you that, but it's good stuff, and that's the real kind of stuff that I want to see more of. It would be great if the stories became a little more coherent. I recognize that ghost stories are not always coherent, but all in all, I enjoyed my time here, and if you're into that kind of Silent Hill psychological dive into a character's mind and unraveling all those little threads, I think Disintegration Street is going to hit the mark for you. And if what you see of the art is off-putting, trust me, Swan is improving rapidly. We're going to see more of that when we talk about Strangelove, but if you don't have this volume, you are going to be lost when we get into the later volumes that are, I'm sure, really going to look nice and tell, hopefully, even better stories with a stronger, clearer through line to them. So if you're not into strong psychological horror and you're just looking for a kind of Scooby-Doo-ish story where a bunch of friends run roughshod through a place where strange things are happening and find the culprit, Disintegration Street may not be your cup of tea. It is definitely a PG-13 story, not quite R-rated, I would say, but a strong PG-13. It's got some scary elements. It's got some violence to it. We know that at least one ghost exists because they committed suicide, so some of the topics are heavy. I wouldn't recommend it if you're just looking for a light Scooby-Doo-ish romp. But if you wanted to see Scooby-Doo where the characters deal with some slightly heavier stuff, or if you liked some of the darker parts of Mob Psycho 100, Disintegration Street is going to be good for you. So I would definitely recommend checking it out. I know Swan ordered some more copies for this run of it. There might still be some available that you can pick up. That's something to contact him about. But yeah, if you get a chance and you like that kind of Twin Peaks, Silent Hills kind of horror mystery vibe, Disintegration Street is definitely your cup of tea. That's all I've got for you today. Leave a like down below. Comment if you want to know a little bit more about, well, I guess I can't tell you a whole lot more, but comment with your favorite psychological comic, psychological horror comic, and I will talk to you later.